Hello. So the topic we're discussing this week is revolving around attachment theory, and I chose to focus on abusive romantic relationships and how this actually interacts with attachment styles. And so this is of particular note to me because of personal examples that I've experienced, and I'm going to briefly touch on one in particular that kind of relates to the two attachment styles I'm going to be discussing. And so the first attachment style I want to focus on with this topic is the anxious preoccupied attachment style. And I wanted to focus on this because in this attachment style, we see an emphasis on others over self. And so we see a negative reflection on one's own perception of themselves as opposed to the positive that they have of others. And in this case, being a partner in a romantic relationship. And so this attachment style can develop in childhood if the child feels as though they're not getting sufficient approval or sufficient reassurance or even just responsiveness from their caretakers, from those attachment figures that they have. And so when this perpetuates into adulthood, this can make them likely to become overly dependent. Because of their negative view of themselves, they may attach to somebody who gives them attention and satisfies that need for responsiveness, even if they have the flaw of being abusive, whether that's verbally, physically, or even sexually. And so this attachment style kind of lends itself to someone having that idea of low self esteem to the point that their partner can almost get away with murder, as the saying goes, and it not be acted upon because of the anxiety that they feel in trying to cope with finding a new partner instead of just pouring into the one partner that they already have. The other attachment style that kind of relates to this topic is the fearful avoidant or the disorganized, the unsure attachment style. And this one can develop in childhood actually as a result of things such as trauma, abuse, um, complete neglect, or even confusion in this state. And why trauma is of note in this, or abuse is of note, is because this can lead to a state of confusion on the part of a child. They're attaching to somebody, they're relying on somebody for security, for safety, for reassurance, for encouragement, for all those positive emotions, positive feedback. And if that person is physically, mentally abusive, you know, that can lead to a state of confusion on that child as to when do I attach, when do I push away. Um, and so when we look at this as it develops into adulthood, this can lead to the negative of both the anxious, preoccupied, as well as the dismissive attachment styles, because they may be in a state where they have something that's good for them and they push it away, or they have something negative and they hold on to it, simply because they're afraid of what may happen if they try to get out of a relationship they're in, even if that is an abusive one, as we're discussing, and trying to reestablish those connections with another person because they may think that perhaps it could be worse. Perhaps the grass isn't greener on the other side, you know. And so we run into a situation where they may avoid the problem altogether by just staying in their current relationship, even if it's abusive. And so there's actually someone that my fiance and I know fairly well. We've known for years, and she seems to struggle with this idea of being in an abusive relationship, and she tends to show a lot more of this the fearful avoidant attachment style, in that she has a very, very low self-esteem of herself, but also doesn't hold others in high regard. She makes comments regarding the ulterior motives of another individual or how they're going to take advantage of her anyway, but she doesn't hold a high enough regard of herself to value her own worth enough to step outside that relationship. And so I see this in action. I see this in my own personal interactions, where this attachment style can have such a profound impact on not only the relationships that we choose to engage in, but also those that we choose to foster. And so I would definitely argue on the part that attachment styles can have a very intense influence or a very significant influence on our relationships, especially when it pertains to abusive relationships, as these are situations where even if we have high self-esteem, maybe that's brought down. Maybe that's diminished to the point that we become, instead of being secure, we become anxious or preoccupied, or we become fearfully avoidant. And when this happens, we may be unlikely or maybe unable in some cases to actually move beyond the status of that relationship or the interactions we have within that relationship because of the difficulty that presents. And so, attachment styles, not only in how we conduct ourselves in any kind of relationship, but especially in romantic relationships where we have this idea of intimacy, of very close knit, closely connected lives, that it may be difficult to make that change already, but adding into that one of these more insecure attachment styles, as well as the abuse that may come from that situation or the confusion that may come from getting attention sometimes and abuse others, can actually make that a difficult situation to escape from. And so we have to understand that these attachment styles and attachment theory in general as an explanation for foundational bases of developmental psychology, but also as it pertains to psychology well into adulthood, how that can actually play a role in abusive romantic relationships or just relationships in general.